It's wonderful to be back in Tucson again. I love it here. It's a wonderful city, and I've visited it many times. This morning was, of course, very exciting because of the snow. If this had been Texas A&M University, we'd have closed the university, so I was a little nervous. Anyway, what I hope to do tonight is to tell you a little bit about how experimental research in economics can be used to look at different types of questions. So I'm focusing on the gender leadership gap in this talk, but there's lots of other things that we use experiments for too, and I hope to give you some idea of what the value of this kind of approach can be. Okay, so the gender leadership gap. Probably you know this, but women are underrepresented at the top. Women are 58% of the US workforce, but 35% of leadership positions, and that includes all of them. If you go all the way to the top, if you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, 41 of them are women out of 500. In Congress, we've recently had a little boost in the number of women in Congress, just here in the last few years, and we're up to 29% of representatives and a quarter of senators. Still, you know, we got a lot of room to make things better. Women who do make it to the upper ranks also tend to earn less than the men who make it to the same ranks. And so the question, you know, the question that we all ask, all the people in my field and in other fields who study the gender gap at various levels of the labor market, is we just want to understand why. Because by understanding why, we can perhaps, well, first of all, figure out if we should do something about it, and if so, figure out how to do something about it. So that's what I'm up to here. So why are there gender differences? There might be a lot of reasons. You can probably think for yourself for plenty of reasons. We tend to divide the gender differences into two categories. One is ways in which women are different from men, and the other is ways in which women are treated differently from the way men are treated. So there's quite a bit of research, and if you ask me questions at the end, I'll be happy to talk about it, on women, on risk aversion, altruism, competitiveness, and time preference. And all these things show pretty significant gender differences. Oops, there's a typo. Also, it seems to be the case that women avoid leadership, that they don't want to be the person in charge. And that's an interesting issue too. So we also want to know why that is. Then there's the possibility that women are not so different, but are just treated differently. So how might women be treated differently, and why? Well, people might just prefer male leaders, and so they might discriminate in favor of men over women in leadership positions. But it's also possible that it's more complicated, that people have complicated culture-based beliefs about differences in women and men and ways in which women and men perform and operate, and that those beliefs, which are pretty deeply ingrained in us, that those beliefs are the reason that we have these gender differences at the top. So we're all shaped by the culture that we grow up in and develop in, and we all carry around a lot of beliefs and stereotypes about other types of people. So this seems more likely to me. And then, depending on how we figure this out, how these different things have to do with differences in leadership, we might be able to design interventions that improve opportunities for women at the top. Here's a recent survey. I hope you can see it back there, but if not, I'll show you some things. So this is a survey by the Pew folks, and it's got several thousand people who were interviewed about what's holding women back at the top. The first couple, women are held to higher standards, and companies are not ready to hire women. These are more like the differences in women, the way women are treated by others. But the others at the bottom, family responsibilities don't leave women with enough time, so that's a way in which women might be different. That is, they face tighter constraints. Women don't have enough connections or party support. That's a way in which women might be different and are not tough enough. So women don't make good managers. That's back into the women are held to higher standards. Maybe women just don't make good managers. So that's what people think is true. I don't know if you can see the yellow parts. This is for business and this is for politics. So it's a little hard to see on this screen, but maybe you can see it on the others, that what the popular beliefs are about why there aren't more women in these roles. So let's back up and dig into this a little bit more. Are women different? Well, they don't seem to be less qualified. Women, this is a figure showing the proportion of women getting degrees, college degrees. You can see that this is women with a bachelor's, this is women who are, this is younger women and this is a little bit older. So you can see that there's a lot more bachelor's degrees going to women than even to men. And this has been true for some time. You see that the lines cross here in before 2000, and here they cross about 2010. So that's one thing to be aware of. Also, if you look at graduate degrees, so we saw a lot of growth in the proportion of women getting various, especially STEM graduate degrees in the early part, in the late 90s and early 2000s, but since then it's kind of leveled off. So these, this figure shows 2006 and 2016, and the pink ones are the proportion of women, and the blue ones are, of course, the proportion of men. And what you see is that engineering is still pretty low, 20%. Computer science is pretty low. Earth science, physical sciences, math. I mean, math is nearly 50% now. In the biological sciences, we're up to 60% of these graduate degrees, bachelor's degrees are going to women, and in the social science and psychology, it's more than half. And there are a lot of other statistics that you can cite too. So women are now getting more than half of law degrees. Women are getting about half of medical degrees. And women are getting about 40% of MBAs. So these, it seems that women are picking up the credentials that you would normally expect them to have to be successful at the top. On the other hand, while women may not be less qualified, they may have other characteristics that make them either not want to lead or for others not to choose them. So again, women might be more risk averse. So there's quite a bit of research showing that women choose less risky options. Women choose less risky retirement portfolios. Women choose more insurance. Women choose less risky jobs. And in the lab, the work that I do, women choose less risky alternatives even when they sacrifice earnings in order to do so. Now, this isn't true across all situations or across all tasks, but it is a pattern that you see in a lot of the data. The second one there, women prefer to avoid competitive situations. So there's been, again, quite a lot of work recently showing that women prefer to avoid competition. So even when they know that they're among the best, most highly qualified people in a set of applicants, they prefer to avoid a tournament even one where they would be most likely to win. So the least qualified men in one study are more likely to enter a competition than the most qualified women. And this is a puzzle to explore. Some recent work has shown that women are really reluctant to put themselves forward to self-promote. And that's even when they know that they're the best candidate. Finally, Women may face tighter constraints because of family obligations. And this has a strong cultural basis that women are the ones who get a larger share of household production, we call it, right? So women might be different, and that's a thing that we can consider. On the other hand, women might be not so different, but they might be treated differently. So people might just not like to work for women. They might not like women leaders. Or, as I mentioned before, the biased perceptions that we bring into the world and beliefs about women shape how they're treated. And stereotypes shape those beliefs. So here's something that I found. Okay, so this is just on the internet, right? So there are millions of word clouds on the internet. So on the left is the one I found, male leadership. And the one on the right is female leadership. That's what I searched for when I found these. So I want you to just look at the differences. On the left, we have the guy. He's a game changer. He boosts things. He dominates. He's positive. He succeeds. He has tactics. He's a winner. He does takeovers. He has power. And the women, bless their hearts, are kind and creative and smart and confident and sassy. Yeah, sassy and passionate and determined, but not game changers, right? So this if this is the stereotype, then it's no wonder there aren't that many women in leadership positions.
Are there any words that overlap?
Yeah, there are, but the ones that are big over here are small over there, so, and vice versa. So, but in particular, you don't find kind over here. You remember how he introduced me, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, what's the best way to respond? The best way to respond depends on what the problem is, and we don't know what the problem is. So that we need to understand more about the underlying causes of the gender gap. There are, a lot of underlying causes, and so there are going to be a lot of different research streams by people who look at this. And I'm just going to show you one little corner of that research, of that set of research streams, but hopefully it's one that you'll think is interesting. Economists have a lot of different ways of studying the gender gap. Most research in economics uses what we call observational data, and that's just data that was collected for some other purpose. So companies collect data for various reasons. The government collects data, there's census data, and people do surveys for all kinds of reasons. So observational data is just all this data, and people use the data to try to back out causal relationships from these inconvenient data sets. And this is the main way that the gender gaps have been studied in economics. There's a lot you can learn from this, but there's a lot that you can't learn. And the reason there's a lot you can't learn is that we have this problem, which is that in the real world, too many things are going on at once. So we have women, the women are different or not different. There's discrimination or not discrimination. There's dynamic things that happen when women are not promoted early in their careers, and so they have trouble catching up. I mean, there's just so many different things going on, it's really hard to pin down what the causes are. So we take a different approach. We experiment. So we use what I like to call experimental models. Now, Martin here, he uses theoretical models. He writes down perfect, simple equations that capture particular situations, and then he maximizes and he solves them out, and he gets some ideas about what might motivate people. So what we do in the lab has much of the same flavor. So what we do is we simplify from the world, we make the simplest experiment we can make, and we try to make these little worlds in the lab that capture key components of the world outside the lab, but that leave out all the complication that might get in the way of understanding something. So by making these very carefully constructed, very simple experimental models, we can isolate different possible causes of the phenomena that we observe. So that's our purpose. It's not that different from Martin's purpose, which is to do the same thing with the simplest possible equations that he can use to capture people's motivation. So he's also leaving a lot out from the real world and focusing on the key elements of the situation that he wants to understand. So that's what we do in the lab. These markets and situations that we design in the lab, they're real in the sense that human beings come into the lab, they do something real, and they get paid real money for what they do that they take home with them. So to them, it's very real. They can leave with, quite a bit of money sometimes. And we use mostly college students in the lab, but that's not uniform. So we use college students as subjects for two reasons. One is that we have a lot of them, and the other is that they're really, really good subjects. They read the instructions, they pay attention, and they are motivated by pretty reasonably sized amounts of money. So if we want to use some other kind of subject, we have to worry about them understanding the instructions. We have to worry about them complying with what we ask them to do. We have to worry about giving them enough money to get their attention. So undergraduates are just great subjects. We like them a lot. Another thing that we do with our experiments is we design interventions. So we might decide that this is the problem, we need to test a particular intervention that might make things better. And we test it using an experimental design. We have groups that get the treatment and groups that don't get the treatment, just like a drug trial. And then we compare the group that gets the treatment with the group that doesn't get the treatment, and that's our outcome. So these are called randomized control trials, and we do those in the lab and also in the field. So that's kind of the scope of the work that we do in experiments on gender differences. We develop these experimental models in the lab, and then we test interventions using randomized control trials. We collect our own data. Because we collect our own data, we have control over it. We know exactly the properties of our data set. They're not inconvenient. We don't have to use fancy econometrics to understand what's there. The statistics become much simpler. And we can ask very specific questions. Now I'm going to turn to the two studies that I wanted to tell you about. The first one is called It Pays to Be a Man, and the second one is called, it's got a more academic title, Gender and Leadership in Competitive and Cooperative Settings. So these are the two studies I want to tell you about. First of all, study one, It Pays to Be a Man. So our goal in this study was to isolate gender as a cause of differences in outcomes. So we want to isolate the differential impact of a leader's gender. And in order to do that, we have to control everything else. So we have to control the perceptions of the leaders. We have to control, I'll show you on the next slide, actually. So we have to control any factors that might affect leadership success. So we want to make sure that our leaders, our male and female leaders, have exactly the same qualities, that they bring exactly the same information and exactly the same skill to the job, that they're not selected on anything. So the men are not selected differently from the women. We randomly select the leaders, in fact. And the leaders merely occupy the leadership position. So they have nothing special. And there's no agency problem. So here's what we do. We have them subjects come to the lab, and we have them play a specific game. It's called a coordination game. You'll see why in a minute. So they play this game, and what we know about this game from past studies is that if there's a leader, people do much better in this game, and they earn a lot more money. So we're using this game that other people have used, and it's a game that mimics production. And then we're going to add a leader to it. So what we do is we bring all the subjects in, they're allocated to groups of 5, they play this game for a few rounds, they fail at it, they do quite badly. We bring the leader in, so the leader comes in from the back of the room, she walks to the front of the room, she gets up on a stage, and she says what we told her to say. So the leaders are trained before they come in, they know exactly what their message is, they all give the same message, and then we look and see how that message, one message, they don't do it again, they just sit up there and watch, one message affects the outcome in the games. So that's the only thing that's different about the leaders is that they're male or female, right? So we know we don't have any confounds in this setup. So let's see, there's the game. In the game, everybody picks a fee. You pick your minimum fee. You pick your fee, 0, 1, 2, and 3, and that costs you some money. And then the outcome is determined by the minimum personal fee selected by any member of the group. So if everybody in the group picks 3, but one person picks 0, then the 0 is the thing that determines earnings. So in this game, any common choice of fee is what we call an equilibrium. That is, if you get there, nobody has any incentive to change. But the best equilibrium is this one here, where everybody picks a $3 fee, and the group minimum is $3. And so everybody earns $2 for that round. You can see that any other combination has a lower payoff than that one. So it's a little bit risky to pick $2, because if somebody picks to pick $3, because if somebody picks less, you're going to earn less. So if somebody picks 2, it drops to 75 cents. If somebody picks 1, it drops to 50 cents, to minus 50 cents, and you can even lose $2 if somebody else in your group picks 0. So what a leader does, the leader comes in and says, hey, this is what we're going to do. Everybody needs to choose 3. And then she can talk about why everybody needs to choose 3. We gave her a list of talking points. And she can say, everybody needs to choose 3 because if everybody chooses 3, everybody makes the most money. And we need everybody to choose 3 because everybody needs to choose 3 or we won't all earn $2. You know, it's really super simple. Every leader takes the same action and there's no difference in the actions that they take. That make sense? Okay, so let's see what happens. In periods 1 to 10, there's no leader. And then, as I told you, after that, the leader comes in and relays their message, and they play again. So here's what happens. There are 4 bars here. The first 2 bars are for the female leader. So remember, in the first 10 periods, they don't know they're going to have a female leader. These are just the groups that got the female leader. So that's before she comes in and after she comes in. The green is the good outcome. So that's when everybody picks 3. So you can see she's super effective. Now, the sessions that happen to get male leaders, they started out a little better to start with. And after the male leader comes in, they turn out to be a little bit better than the female leader, but that's not a significant difference once you adjust. So you can see that the leaders are effective, and in fact, they're equally effective. The men and the women in these experiments, they all do equally well. There's no difference in performance. So that's good. We designed it that way, right? So it's good that it came out that way. Now, what else? We get the leaders evaluated. We ask subjects what impact they think the leader had on their earnings. And then these are open-ended. They can say whatever they want, and then they're rated by a group of raters. Here's what we got. So you can see that the male leaders are in black, and the female leaders are in red. So who's up here at the top with the highest rating? It's the guys. Oh. Did you see that? Okay, so the guys do get higher ratings. We tried a couple of other things. We had them assess their bosses, their leaders, on a set of good qualities. And we also thought, maybe physical attractiveness matters. So we had them evaluated on attractiveness, and then we controlled for those two things. And in the end, even after we control for these two things, the ratings are still different. So the ratings are still significantly different. So what about rewarding the leaders? The leaders get a bonus, and the bonus is voted on by the workers. It turns out that after controlling for earnings, their leadership attributes, and their attractiveness, male leaders receive a significant bonus premium. So the female leaders get 8.4% and the male leaders get 9.9%. This isn't a huge difference, but it's a 16% difference in what they earn. So not huge, but about what we see in the field. Okay, so what did we do with this study? We made a little experimental model in the lab. We made a world where the only thing that varied was gender. And we showed that male and female leaders do equally well, but they're evaluated differently and rewarded differently for no reason. So let's go on to study 2. In study 2, we look at the gender leadership gap in 2 different environments. So our thinking here was, maybe women don't do that well in competitive settings, but if there's a situation with a cooperative setting, maybe women do better with that. Women are kind and competent and sweet and cooperative and all those things from the high heel that you saw, right? In fact, we do see that there's no gender gap in earnings if you look at leaders of charitable organizations or nonprofits. And so this seems to be like it might be true that women do better in cooperative settings. So again, we make an experimental model. Let me back up just a second and say, we know a lot about women not wanting to work in competitive environments from a lot of experiments that have been done. I'd be glad to talk to you about these if you ask questions at the end. But less is known about how the job setting itself affects the gender gap. So that's what we're looking at. We want to know if women are more effective in more cooperative settings. We want to know conditional effectiveness. Are female leaders evaluated more strongly in those cooperative situations? So we showed that in a really neutral situation, women are rewarded less than men. But what if it's a cooperative situation where the stereotype is that women have an advantage? So will that be a situation where women are evaluated more highly? And we're also interested in the question of whether women are more willing to lead in those cooperative settings. All right, so what design features do we need in our experimental model? Well, we need a game, and the game has to be one that we can adapt to be cooperative or competitive without fundamentally changing the game. That is, we want the game to be as similar as possible. We also want to pick one where leaders are likely to be effective, so one where that's likely to be true, and we decided to pick something called the centipede game. You'll see why in a minute. There it is. There's our little centipede. You see how it's got little sets of legs? Yeah. In this game, we have 2 players, a blue and a red player, and the little nodes are steps in the game. So if the first player stops the game, they earn 4 and the other person earns 1. If the first person passes, then player 2 gets to make a decision. They can either exit, that means they get 7, and the blue player gets 2, or they can pass. And then player 1 is on again, and player 1 can choose to exit where they get 10 and the other person gets 3. So you see what's happening here is every time you pass, you're kind of putting your well-being in the other player's hands. As you go along, the total gets bigger, but you can lose a lot by not being the one who exits. So the temptation is to exit early, but the longer you can keep the play going, the bigger the pie that's going to be divided between the subjects. So what would leadership in this setting do? Well, we're thinking that leadership might be able to encourage people to keep going. So we want them to just keep going, because the farther they go, the more production there is. That's the way in which this mimics production. In our competitive environment, we use a pretty standard centipede game. It's 8 rounds long, as you can see there. We add a couple of things. One is we add some possibilities that the computer can end the game. So just a random ending. And what happens at those random endings is just the game ends early. We still keep the asymmetric payments. But if they get all the way to the end, they get 28 and 9. So we also, the game doesn't necessarily end at 8. The game can end at any time. And that random end means that either player could end up with the larger share. So we did that to try to be fair. In the cooperative game, we changed those computer ending payoffs. So the computer can end here, or here, or here. And if the computer ends the game, they're equal payoffs for the 2 players. So that means that this game has the possibility of making both players better off. And if they get to the end, they split it equally at 18.5 each. So the difference in framing is not huge. It's just one where payoffs are always unequal, and so people are making a competitive decision when they decide to exit or to continue on. And in this one, there are many possibilities for cooperative outcomes where the outcomes are split equally. Okay, so that's how we set things up. That's the game. We also needed to do something with our leaders. So again, we randomly selected male and female leaders. We needed a way to reveal the leader's gender. In our previous experiment, we just had the leader walk in. But here we've got a whole bunch of people playing at once, and we need a way to reveal the identity of the leader without giving away who they actually are. And so we had a nickname that they could choose. And the female players only got to pick female nicknames, and the male players only got to pick male nicknames, so we had control over that. We had a detailed evaluation of the leaders, a measure of beliefs about effectiveness, as before, and we also got into this question of whether they are willing to lead and why. Okay, so what did we find? Men and women are equally effective in both settings. So there's some small differences, but basically women and men are equally effective at getting people to keep going in that centipede game. So that's good. Men and women are equally effective in both of them. We thought that, men might be better in one and women in the other, but we're happy that they are equally effective in both. Now,
How do they communicate?
oh, they communicate, the leader sends a message to the 2 players through the computer. Yeah. It's all anonymous, so we don't have to worry about these personal characteristics like attractiveness affecting what happens. Okay, this is competitive over here and cooperative over here, and each one of these figures is the average evaluation. So in the competitive game, we have that men are evaluated, this is the follower gender. Men evaluate men higher than women. Women evaluate men higher than women, so it's not just the guys. But in the cooperative game, the evaluations are equal. So both male and female followers evaluate male and female leaders equally. They're a little happier, the women leaders. But, the female, sorry, I didn't say that right. The female followers are a little happier than the male followers in the cooperative environment, which is consistent with what we know already, that women prefer a more cooperative environment. Okay, so we have what we got before, which is that there's a bias, that the female leaders are evaluated lower in the competitive environment, even though their performance is the same. Interestingly, women report a lower willingness to lead in both environments. We thought women might be more willing to lead in the cooperative one, but they are not. Women are unwilling to lead in both of them, or just not hugely, but a little bit less willing to lead in both. In the competitive, women are a little bit less likely to want to lead. In the cooperative, that difference is actually a bit larger. So why? I don't know why. This is a figure we did showing the reasons that people give for not wanting, or for wanting to or not wanting to be the leader. It's a little confusing. Let me explain it. So here's the men, and here are the reasons. The colors are the reasons. So at the top, you have the reasons people don't want to be the leader, and at the bottom, you have the reasons people do want to be the leader. And in the middle, the red one is indifferent, being indifferent between being the leader and not being the leader. And so what do you see as the differences between these? Well, the big two are here at the top. Women don't want to lead because they think they don't have the ability to lead. This is not a complicated situation. They don't have the ability to lead, and they don't think that they will be able to increase payoffs. They're less. This black one is. Oh, I said that wrong. It's the gray one that's indifferent, and the red one is yes. They think they can get higher payoffs. So the women don't think they can get higher payoffs, and that's one of the reasons that they don't want to be the leader. So women don't want to be the leader because they lack confidence and because they care less about the payoffs. So what are the takeaways? Men and women are equally effective at the task, but they are believed to be, they're penalized, they're believed to be less, they're evaluated lower. So female leaders are penalized in evaluations, and they're penalized in their rewards. They get lower bonuses. So just like in the previous study, women are evaluated and rewarded less than men for the same level of performance. But our results do suggest that a more cooperative environment can help close the gender difference in evaluation. Okay, so what have we done here? We know there aren't that many studies that do this with observational data, but here's a study in one industry showing that if you take people and you order them by work experience in years, men at every level of work experience are more likely to be promoted than women. And that's got to be, at least in part, due to these differences in perceptions and beliefs about how the women are performing, not due to objective differences in their performance. So what can we do about this? We've shown that when women are equally effective by design, they're evaluated and rewarded less. We've shown a similar pattern across two different environments, but having a cooperative environment helps. The implication is that you have to take care when evaluating people to ensure that the evaluation procedures are objective and not subjective. Subjective evaluations penalize women. If you can look at their productivity and their performance, then equal performance can be detected. But if you just ask people how well they're doing, the subjective evaluations seem to be lower. Promotion procedures. What should we do about promotions to make women more likely to be promoted conditional on their performance? Well, a lot of promotions happen because people ask for them. So a way to, and of course men are more likely to ask than women, but a way to level the playing field there is to have promotion consideration be automatic. So as part of the annual review, add in also information about promotion and the opportunity to be promoted. This is even true in our own field in academia. Women are likely to be promoted before women. Not at the tenure stage so much, but at the full professor stage, For a given record, a man is more likely to be promoted than a woman. The final implication is education. So we didn't test this, but there are other people testing training systems. Most training systems that you take as employees or as university employees are terrible. They're terrible, they're a waste of time, and they just piss you off, right? Yeah, but there are some that are effective. So there are some that have been evaluated that are effective in changing people's beliefs. And these are the ones that are the most data-based, that go the most into the studies and show, educate people about the actual research findings. So what did we learn here? We learned that there are a lot of possible reasons for the gender gap in leadership. We learned that we can use experimental methods to test things in ways that can't be done with observational data, and to focus on the evaluation and rewarding of male and female leaders. And we're able to suggest based on that, we're able to suggest some ways in which we might be able to diminish the leadership gap. There are a bunch of studies out there that attempt to look at other factors, and many other factors also appear to play a role, but focusing on what we focused on, evaluation and reward of performance is one of the places where the leadership gap emerges. And that's a place where we can focus our attention and try to do a bit better. Can you help? What can you do? It seems like too big a problem for any of us, right? But really, you can help a lot. Pay attention. When you see something that looks strange, call someone's attention to it. I mean, not like in the airport with other people's bags, but if you see something, say something. Speak up when you see practices that can maintain biases, and speak up when you know about procedures that can reduce biases. Here's a couple of follow-up articles. I'm sure that we can make these available if folks want them. There are a couple of survey articles on experimental and behavioral economics and gender differences. One focusing on gender differences in the labor market and one focusing on leadership. And there are a few books that I recommend to you. One is by Iris Bonet. She's the past dean of the Kennedy School at Harvard, and she's written a book called What Works that proposes a lot of specific personnel procedures that can really help eliminate the gender gap. The No Club, this is a new book. This focuses on task assignment. So women are assigned systematically different tasks at work than men. Men tend to be assigned the flashy, game-changing tasks, and women, well, guess what? They tend to get assigned the kind tasks. It turns out that those flashy things are the things that get you promoted, and taking care of the other stuff that needs to be done but is not particularly notable is a way to not get promoted. So this is a book on that work. And this is more of a management book looking at, again, at explicit procedures that can reduce the gender leadership gap.
Can I ask you, the No Club, when I read it slightly differently. Now you say women get assigned different tasks.
And they volunteer for them.
Right, that's what I took away, that they are more likely to take on the task. So the authors try to teach women to say no.
Yeah, there are two main messages of that book. One is learning to say no when you should say no, but the other is showing that that women don't just volunteer; they're also asked to volunteer for more servicey type tasks that are less likely to be rewarded. And they do have some really good ideas for how to design the institution, how to change the rules at work to make that better. Yeah. Okay, so this is my team. These are the folks who were my co-authors on these papers. And I'd like to thank you very much for coming and making your way through the snow to come out tonight. Thank you.
Has there been any literature about like history? I'm envisioning have been in a leadership position within a firm, then suddenly it's easier, or you see more women taking interest. Has there been any lab experiments about that, like if you're showing participants like, oh, beforehand there was a female leader or something like that?
Yeah, so there are a number of field experiments looking at female role models and how they affect women's willingness to do various things. The one I'm the most familiar with, it has to do with majoring in economics. So if you take a female former graduate and bring them into an early economics class, that can, just for like a 15-minute talk, that can have a substantial effect on the proportion of women who decide to major in economics. It's a thing that we struggle with. We want more women to major in economics. You know, they can major in sociology, or they can major in economics and study the same stuff and make $50,000 more. We just don't understand why they don't want to major in economics. But there are also similar studies having to do with leadership, usually in smaller groups. I'm not sure about studies within companies, but I bet there are. Role models matter. Be a role model.
Have you or others examined what impacts increasing the number of women on company boards has for the company and the leadership gap and gender wage gap?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it a lot? Is it?
Yeah. So there is research on that. It's not mine, but there's quite a bit of research showing that when you introduce women onto boards, things change. So there's several studies that show that having women on boards increases total profit. And there are others that have some more interesting effects. So it seems that having women on boards gives the company a longer view. So when there's a downturn, they might hold on to more of their employees. And that's costly in the short run, but has a benefit in the long run. So you see an increase in long-run profitability, but a decrease in sort of harsh personnel decisions. Oh, there's that kindness again. Yeah, so certainly, and there's one study I know of that shows that having more women on a corporate board in a particular industry in India actually increases corruption. But you're bound to have some studies that go the wrong way.
So Claudia Golden's got this new book, a historical book, talking about the structure of the way work is done.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good book to look at. And so she has this great example of pharmacists versus lawyers. And that the pharmacies actually shifted towards having standardized hours, like 40 hours a week or 45, away from a situation where they worked long hours. And so whereas lawyers continue to you have to work 80 hours a week and do all these kind of things.
Yeah.
And that shift actually makes a huge difference in what happens down the line.
Yeah.
Women typically take care of the kids.
That's a classic example of institutional design. Yeah. So Claudia finds that in industries where there's a lot of face time and where there's this pressure on people to be around and to have long hours, it also tends to be places where the incentives are very competitive, like you get this bonus if you're the best, you handle the most hours or something. That the representation of women is the lowest in those fields. And the gender gap in pay and in leadership is the greatest in those fields. So in fields that have, and part of that is just that you're going to have some women who have obligations that don't let them work 80 hours a week. And you also have some women who have sense enough to know that that's not how they want to spend their lives. I mean, there's men too, of course. Within lawyers, though, there are other types of lawyers, not the corporate ones, but like the public employees, public defenders. My daughter is a public defender, and everyone in her office is female. But they work, they mostly work 40-hour weeks. They occasionally have a big overtime thing. So there are opportunities for lawyers that are not in this competitive part, but their salaries are much lower, like less than half of the salaries of the other more competitive attorneys. I think that there's something about the culture of workplaces, that workplaces that value competitiveness are less likely to choose and promote women, not necessarily because the women who are there are less competitive, but because they believe they are. And that this has a major impact, just like different cultures around the world have a major impact. Different corporate cultures have a major impact on the gender gap. So look at economics, for example. In economics, we have a rhetoric that really values competition. No, in like a deep philosophical way, we think competition is like the be-all and the end-all of everything, and the thing that makes the world go around, and the invisible hand and all that, right? So is it any wonder that that we look like those competitive workplaces? We're an organization that values this thing, competitiveness.
Recently, some boy in her class made 2 claims. A lot of boys. That first, boys are athletically better.
I'm sorry, boys are what?
Athletically better. Second, boys are smarter. Of course, the girls in her class were furious about these arguments. Do you have any advice for her and the girls in her class how to deal with this situation?
Well, deep in your heart, you can know that women are better. So, sorry guys, I didn't really mean that, but in terms of academic achievement, women are doing so well these days. So all the way through, so middle school, high school, college, women are outscoring men. They're getting more likely to go to college, getting more college degrees. They're just doing so well. Your fellow student he's just behind the times. Yeah, but seriously, guys, we need not just the women to be on board to make the world a better and more equal place. We can't do it without you. We need the guys too. So it can't be a battle of the women against the men. This is just not the right way to do it, and it's not going to work in the long run. The only way that it can work is if we all work together to make our workplaces better for everyone, and to increase the productivity of all of our workers by getting rid of this stupid bias. Yeah? We need you, and we probably need your classmate too, but you should know what's true.
When I look at, and it's true that I do that kind of research, but I haven't done it with respect to leadership, okay? It's been other things. And
Sure.
in fact, I think there are very few economic studies of leadership. So we have Mark in the middle there, you're pointing to him.
We have Mark,
He's a pioneer,
Mark and
but
Mana.
he's not quite alone, but relatively few people have done it. So I wanted you to comment on, for the theorists in the audience, your vision about how economists might want to theorize about leadership.
Economists have been really good at taking their basic model, which is a pretty stripped down model of human motivation, and thoughtfully adding different ways in which human beings are motivated. So human beings care about more than their earnings, and the simplest economics models really just focus on earnings. But human beings care about their social status, they care about their reputation, they care about other people, they care about their standing in the profession, they care that they are good at what they do. I mean, people just care about a lot of different things. And one thing that we might look at is whether people care about being the person in charge. So I can imagine working on theoretical models that try to do the same thing. So it's a parallel thing to what we have done. The reason that we did ours the way we did is because there really wasn't any theory for us to start with. So we hope that we are producing stylized facts that can be used as the basis for building a more systematic, formal, theoretical setup. Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.